to this first session where we are going to try and understand the future, to understand whether we are facing a happy valley or the whole thing is a house of cards about to collapse. I once persuaded Tony Blair to write in a speech about the future of technology that one day we would even be able to fax from the beach. So I don't quite know why I'm up on this panel, but we've got a brilliant panel who are much better futurologists than me. Emily Bell, who will be very well known to you, first as a fantastic media correspondent in the 90s, and then as one of the originators of The Guardian's fantastic digital presence, now a professor at the Tau Center for Digital Journalism at Columbia University and a fantastic contributor to debates on journalism and technology. Susanna Dinage, who is a launch specialist, was involved in launches for Five US, MTV, VH1, and is now general manager of Discovery Networks, and will give us a great perspective from the channel side of things. Benedict Evans, who I'm sure many of you receive messages from in your inbox every week, once a Vendors and now at Andreessen Horowitz in the Valley. Stephen Lambert, who is known, I'm sure, to everybody in this room, a fantastic producer of programs, chief executive of Studio Lambert, chairman of All3 America, originator of countless fantastic programs from Faking It to The Secret Millionaire, Wife Swap, but also once upon a time a brilliant BBC documentary producer. Stephen Nuttall, once of Sky and now the head of YouTube's partnerships and business for the EMEA region. So an absolutely brilliant panel. And to set up the conversation, the RTS committee asked Cassian Harrison from the BBC, controller of BBC4, and Jean-Paul Petranka from BCG to think a bit about the future, talk to lots of people, and bring those thoughts together to introduce this session. And I'm now going to ask Cassian to come up to do exactly that.
Find my doobry. Hello. Welcome. So as James says, we wanted to have a wide-ranging discussion just to kick off the RTS, just about where we are, what the future might be, the changing dynamic of the industry that we're all in. So over the next few minutes, we wanted to give you some food, or more accurately, some data for thought, some big trends and some big pictures. But first, something to ponder on as we do that, which is the big question. We know we're in a world of change, but who do we think is going to win? Because there's a lot of competing factors here. Will it be the traditional broadcasters and distributors? Will it be the content owners who actually create the fabulous content that we all enjoy, who own the IP? Or will it be the new big global digital players, the Amazons, the Googles, the Netflixes? Or in fact, will it all be one unholy mess where everybody buys everyone else and no one knows which way is up anymore? What might be fun is to have a guess. So if you do crack out your smartphone, as we suggested, fire up the RTS app, and there'll be a moment just a little bit later in this presentation when you can have a go at what you think. And we'll have a look at what everyone thinks at the end of this session. But for our quick overview that Jean-Paul and David Bunker also from BBC Audiences and I pulled together, we chose 3 different lenses to look through. And the first was technology. If there's one simple way to think about the revolution that we're going through, it's all about the screens. Over 5 billion square feet of new LCD screen was manufactured last year. That's a square foot for pretty much every person on the planet. And what's driving this gluttony of glass? The advent of the most popular piece of consumer technology since the wristwatch, the smartphone, and its slightly overweight cousin, the tablet. Smartphones now outnumber TV sets 2 to 1, and they've boosted most people in the UK to at least dual screen ownership. And while globally, mobile phones are apparently, so I'm told, more accessible than toilets. But it's not just the screen, it's what it's connected to. Already your smartphone can guzzle down high definition over mobile networks and ultra high definition over Wi-Fi. And give it another 6 years, and who knows what we'll be doing with 5G. We couldn't even fit the bandwidth from 5G onto the graph. And what does all that mean for TV? Well, it means that we've gone from 30 million people tuning in to watch Angie and Den 30 years ago to a world where we have 60 million people who can all be watching whatever they want, whenever they want. And the screens themselves? Well, it seems that moving pictures remain constantly compelling. They're our best window on the world, and that window is getting ever more ubiquitous and immersive. And although there is one other thing that we did wonder that might beat this on the horizon, is this the reason, in terms of immersion, that people are spending so much money on virtual reality? The next thing we wanted to look at was behavior. What are we doing with all of this new technology? Well, the first key thing is that we all still love our traditional television. For all the proliferation of new devices, we still watch television by far the most. And what we're doing is using these new devices to watch even more video on top. And it's the mobile devices that are driving that extra viewing, with the amount of mobile viewing doubling every year. And if we follow this curve, it seems that we might all be watching 3 hours of mobile digital video every day by 2017. But we do have to acknowledge that traditional broadcast audiences are falling, especially amongst the young. There's something clearly compelling about watching video on those shiny new devices. More than half of children prefer to watch video on a phone or a tablet. 40% of parents say their kids would choose the tablet over even dessert. And it's not just the kids. More than half of us confess to watching video on our mobile phones while we're watching TV as well, particularly my daughter, who I have to keep on telling off about it. But the TV set is still by far the most popular screen in the house. However, it's also being used for ever more things. 12% of TV use is things bulbs can't match: games, VOD, legacy PVR recordings. And for the young, that rises to 25%. While even in the heart of TV viewing, Saturday night, in fact, 3.3 million of us in the UK are watching something other than scheduled television. So what we watch and how we watch is becoming ever more diverse. TV used to come in chunks anywhere between 30 and 90 minutes long. Now it can be anything from 90 seconds to 9 hours if you really want to nail that box set in one go. And we're watching at any and every time of day, from short-form clips over the muesli to a sneaky BBC4 Storyville under the duvet. And if you haven't tried that, I recommend it. And we're watching everywhere too. Oh, sorry, clicked on. It's not that I'm toilet obsessed with the other gag from before, but I did enjoy one source that told me that basically 10% of all digital video consumption happens in the bathroom. And since you can't actually waterproof any gadgets, we reckon that that must be on the loo as well. But anyway, with this potent cocktail of new tech and new behavior, what does it mean for the business? Well, for all those changes in tech and behavior, there's no doubt that traditional broadcasters are still incredibly powerful and incredibly popular. This is a list of the top 20 rating shows in the UK and the US from last year. And what's important to note, that everyone is aired by network broadcasters, and everyone is indigenous to that country. It's made there. And in the UK in particular, it's striking just what a diversity of genres there is. There's drama, there's Saturday night talent shows, and of course, Bake Off. Another striking thing is how well live and broadcast sit together to make an incredibly compelling offer, particularly for sports you can see in the US. But it's not just in mass viewership that the traditional broadcast model has strength. It's predicted that more than 10,000 new broadcast channels will launch over the next 10 years. Why? As I know, running BBC4, it's an incredibly efficient way to reach passionate parts of your audience. There's just one series on African art that we aired that's reached 3.5 million viewers through that traditional linear mode. And the big tech players can see the appeal of the curated channel too. We've got Apple Music launching off the back of, well, a traditional curated radio station. We've got Vice cutting deals to have its own linear broadcast channel. And Twitter's Project Lightning bringing manual curation to social media. It's back to that efficiency and effectiveness. Perhaps my favourite stat of the latest Barb report was that the last series of Strictly racked up twice as many viewing hours just in the UK as Psy's Gangnam Style video did around the whole planet with its 2.2 billion views. But nevertheless, alongside these brilliant broadcast channels, there's 3 new business models, each expected to grow significantly over the next 5 years. There's buy-to-own VOD, established and not that huge. But then there's subscription VOD, Netflix, Amazon Prime, and last, the real behemoth, ad-funded VOD. YouTube, Facebook, even Snapchat are predicted to grow 5-fold by 2020. But can all of that growth really stack up financially? Well, we thought it might be worthwhile drilling into a recent, rather famous VOD deal for a series that we might call Top Car. What would it take for a company like Amazon to make money from this Top Car product? This is a bit of a back of a fag packet calculation, but it's quite interesting. Let's just take the numbers. We've got a reported $250 million deal over 3 years, meaning that Amazon needs to return $83 million a year. We've deducted a really conservative amount of income from DVD and merchandising, leave $58 million a year that is needed to get from those subscriptions. We estimate around $65 overhead costs per subscriber, although that's balanced by an increased spend on other Amazon stuff, which leaves an extra income ultimately of $59 each. So, if we've got to make $58 million a year, we'll need 1 million new subscriptions each year to recover that. Which means that our Amazon will need to persuade 15% of a UK Top Car audience to sign up. And that might be a bit of a challenge. But if you scale that across a global audience, you only need 0.3%. There's a back of a fag packet calculation, as I say, but it is quite bracing. And meanwhile, at the other end of the market, YouTube is already doing incredibly well. We estimate a global audience of 47 million every hour of the day or night. But what's striking is the rapid growth of other platforms alongside. Facebook, maybe we might have predicted, but who would have thought that a messaging app would become a major VOD platform? And with these new forms of distribution come new forms of content. Learning on demand, ice bucket challenges, Lego reviews, the sort of thing that you could never imagine playing on our national broadcast channels. And alongside that, a new generation of stars. When Variety asked US teenagers which celebrities they most respected, the entire top 5 were from YouTube. So, a bit of a whirlwind trip. And remember that question I asked at the top? Who's going to win? So if you crack out your phone now, and there is actually, if you take a look on the home page, there's a Vote Now button, a lightning icon at the bottom. So you can make your choice, and we'll see what the results are at the end of the session. But the choices really are quite simple. Is it the traditional broadcasters? Can they manage to build out their offer from their traditional distribution models and maintain the massive brand fidelity that they have? Or will it be the content makers? They're the ones that actually create the IP. Will they be able to reach out directly to consumers? Emily was telling me at the weekend that Kickstarter is now one of the world's major funders of documentaries. It's raised $100 million to fund documentaries. And then last of all is the global aggregators, the YouTubes, the Amazons, the Netflix, building on their ease of navigation. So if you make your choice now, press on the button, and actually you can have the choice of any 3 of them, or in fact none of them, or in fact all of them, because as I say, it's pretty unpredictable. When's the future? 2020, shall we say? 2020. Pretty soon, Stephen. Let's go with that.
Stephen, I thought we'd start with program making and commissioning and pitching. You know, Armando Iannucci was saying at Edinburgh that for all the technological change, not a huge amount had changed in program making. Do you feel that's right, or do you feel that things have changed a lot? And how do you see it changing over the next 5 or 10 years?
I don't think it has changed very much. I mean, I think we have the same challenge of trying to come up with an idea that we believe in and persuading people to buy those ideas. And this, although we've got more efficient about how we make the programs, and we use technology in a different way to, say, when I was making programs on 16mm film, it's pretty much the same process. I think there's a greater emphasis on trying to come up with ideas. A lot of the big hits are shows that are made in a very quick period of time, from Strictly to X Factor to Gogglebox. And I think there are quite a lot of challenges in turning around a program from start to finish in that time space. But I think the biggest challenge is coming up with an idea that works. I think that it's harder than ever to have a hit. It's always been difficult, but it's, you know, you look at American television, on broadcast television, particularly in the non-scripted area, there hasn't been a hit for ages. I mean, our own show, Undercover Boss, was one of the few exceptions, but we had the springboard of coming in on the back of the Super Bowl. But this summer, there were 12 new non-scripted shows launched on a broadcast. They all failed, with the possible exception of Celebrity Family Feud. It's it's pretty much the same. It's a real struggle on cable. We're finding now, making programs for American cable, that they are so unsure about what's going to work that they don't even bother to market the first season. They sort of put the shows out there, and when the audience decide that something is going to work for them, that's when they put all their energies into marketing the second season. So I think Britain is still the place where we think it's easier to come up with a new idea and get it away. And there is somehow still a greater concentration on people sort of talking about it, partly because we've got a national press that seems to draw attention to interesting work that people are talking about. But getting those hits is hard.
And is America our future in that respect, or do you think there's a fundamental difference in the ecology?
It all depends on how our very unusual broadcasting environment develops, because we're so different from America in many ways. Obviously, the BBC is so different to anything that exists in the States. The way in which we've been regulated continues to make us very different. But the things that we're talking about here, the growth of the news services and viewing over broadband, that changes things so much. And I don't know how whether that means that we'll end up on a very similar trajectory to America.
Who matters most to you now? Who's got the power now when you're pitching? Has it changed compared to 10 or 20?
No, the buyer.
Is it still
the buyer has the power.
But still the channels, is that who you care about most? Or is all this stuff starting to affect who you think about in terms of raising money?
I concentrate mostly, although we've just started up in scripted, but I concentrate mostly on non-scripted. And the new players aren't, unless you're Jeremy Clarkson, they're not buying non-scripted yet. I think the opportunities in scripted for so many new buyers. I mean, as John Landgraf said, there are 68 scripted buyers in America. There are a lot of buyers here for scripted. And I think that is changing the dynamic. We're suddenly beginning to move into actually a seller's market, particularly if you're, if you're the talent. And again, in scripted, I think it's easier to identify, oh, that's the talent, we've got to get those people, and everybody's after them. And that changes the relationship. But I think for non-scripted producers, it's still the buyer.
So Susanna, you're obviously one of the key non-scripted commissioners. Do you see the trend towards scripting being completely irreversible, or do you see that there's a good, strong future for non-scripted as well?
Well, I think Stephen's made the point. The question is whether it's good or not good. So I think our litmus test is the viewers, will decide. We all know it's not about just the overnight anymore, but it still counts. I think, to answer your question, Stephen, actually, about what's changed and what's stayed the same, I think we're seeing some things sort of polarise even to an even more significant level. So live sport, for example, has become almost exaggerated in its importance. You have to be there, there's no catch-up, the results tonight, no one knows what it is, and the communities that can still generate. At the other end of the spectrum, and something that personally makes me a little sad and frustrated as a broadcaster and a commissioner, is the snap judgments on programmes now. There's no time for things to bed in, even in an hour, let alone across 3 series. And I think, good creativity tends to sometimes need a little bit of time to find its feet. Talent needs time, if you're breaking new talent, to find their feet. And we find, particularly with younger audiences, you've got to get them in the first 3 minutes. Someone said a fantastic thing to me the other day, which is, technology isn't the be-all and end-all, but it makes it very easy for people to break up with you. So, first 3 minutes, people are going to make a judgment whether they're going to stay with you, head off to another channel, or head off to VOD, or head off to, non-linear, or millions of other places they can go. So, I think really we need to be very thoughtful about how committed we are as broadcasters to just sitting with things, keeping investing over a series we believe in a talent we want to grow, and hope that the audience will come back and trust us. Meanwhile, you've got your Twitter sort of feed going, either people going, this is terrible, this is brilliant, but you still have to absolutely have the courage of your conviction. So I think we're seeing sort of polarising view on content.
Stephen, when you look at those numbers of Facebook and Snapchat, others sort of doing well in terms of video growth, what's your response to that? Is it mostly a tech response, or do you think about the same kind of creative issues about getting the best content in? And if so, how do you go about thinking about that?
So I think competition is a good thing. I think we've had a record year at YouTube. So we actually would look at how much content is watched on YouTube as the key measure, so how many hours of content are consumed. And it's up something like 70% year on year, which is the fastest growth that we've had for several years. Viewership on a mobile phone up by well over 100. So I think it's more important to look at how much content is watched than whether it's in very, very short clips. Something like 40% of the video that's watched on YouTube in a month is of long-form content, so more than 22 minutes. So there's a big shift in the type of content that people are consuming. I think we're incredibly positive about the future. What I like, to go back to the point before, is it's now possible for so many other people to tell stories that previously wouldn't have been told. You can take the Khan Academy, which is, if someone had gone and pitched the Khan Academy to a TV channel and said, I'm going to read the algebra textbook from the beginning to the end, solve all the problems within it, put those up as a series, and then when I finish the first algebra textbook, I'm going to do the next one, I don't think that it probably would have got commissioned. Well, it would have been pitched better than that, obviously, but
Cassian might.
Maybe Cassian would have commissioned it. I don't know. We can talk later. But the fact is, he's now one of America's largest educators, with incredibly high quality content.
But do you see their market as the same market as yours, or do you see it as essentially two completely different things?
Look, I think we are very focused on what users want to watch and trying to create platforms for storytellers to tell stories. And then those storytellers can reach a global audience using YouTube, using Facebook, using whatever other platforms they choose to pick up on. And I think there's a fantastic tailwind behind the business with the growth, with more screens being sold, with the internet being capable of doing many more things, with your battery lasting for longer, everything else. So it's a fantastic tailwind, and content creators are very well placed to take advantage of that.
Do you know what percentage of people watching YouTube watch it with others sitting on a sofa in front of a large television?
So I can't tell you how many people are sitting there, but I do know that the fastest growing screen for us is actually the television screen. So that could be someone that's watching on a games console, it could be someone that's watching through their Virgin Media box, it could be someone that's watching through a Chromecast. All of those devices that plug into the living room screen. And I think one of the paradigms that will come in the future, I personally believe, is you'll have your mobile phone with you all the time, and if you're at home and in range of a large screen, there'll be a way to move the picture from your phone to that large screen. And then whether you're going to watch on your own or you're going to watch with a group of people, that will depend, I suppose. That's what you could do with a Chromecast device now. It goes out, the device goes out, it doesn't go through the phone to get to the telly. The device in the back of the TV goes out to the internet and pulls down an HD picture, so you get an amazing experience for the screen that you're closest to. I think that's just a natural user behaviour. You've got to give the people what they want to watch, where they want to watch it, when they want to watch it.
Emily, we were talking beforehand about the difference between TV and news and journalism, and when one reads your speeches, it's very much got almost a sense of fatalism about what's happened in journalism, in that it has to be accepted. The change happened, now we have to cope with it. Looking at television, does it feel like we're about to have happen to us what's happened to the news industry?
Yes and no. I mean, you have more money, which is great news for you. Congratulations. Journalism has never really made money. It's always relied on cross-subsidy because people don't like to advertise against things which are ugly and true, and actually they don't like to subscribe to them either. So you do have high value, what we call reusable content. So it's not exactly the same, but I think that there are some very strong parallels, and I would say that from my perspective, it looks as though some of the conversations that are being had in television now are very similar to the conversations that newspapers had about a decade ago.
So what did they get wrong, and what can we learn?
What did they get wrong? So two things, which I think probably the television industry has already got wrong in a way, which is it's great to have somebody here from YouTube saying we welcome competition, because what we do see is the world is now sort of moving in a distribution platform sense to a very small number of extremely powerful players. So back to your original question, who has won or who can win? If you look at the market capitalization of Google and Apple and Facebook, it's really clear who has already won. You know, that's access to capital is going to be very tough, I think, unless you have a compelling offering and unless you can get rid of your legacy costs. So one lesson from the news industry is decouple those if you're a commercial player in value terms. And the other lesson is stick to your storytelling skills. Because actually, you know, that is absolutely true. That, you know, if you know, what you do see watched heavily on YouTube and now on Facebook, also on. I was trying to download the RTS app, which obviously I couldn't find in the Apple App Store. And again, this is just a demonstration of, you know, this is about. So this is a narrowing world. And if you have the very best content, or you have the quickest. So it's this first or best paradigm, which has actually existed since the days of book publishing, which is, you know, it has to be quick and immediate and fit into people's lives, which is what news has found. You have to move to breaking. Or it has to have real sort of context and quality, or, you know, values in drama that you're not seeing everywhere else. You know, the schedule has been a real drain. You know, the middle of the schedule drained quality out of television. And now we're seeing it sort of going back because actually new platforms enable people to sort out what is good. And I absolutely appreciate it. It's difficult to tell things well over time. If it doesn't start well now on the web, you're sort of done. So I would say that sort of there are parallels, but television is probably better placed, much better placed than we were.
But even if you've got brilliant storytelling skills in journalism now, it's pretty hard to make money out of it. You know, Kickstarter may be raising millions, but that's, you know, it's a very different model. Do you think those storytelling skills would be protection against those kind of global ecosystems? Well,
I think that, you know, one of the big wake-up calls in America was that, so when I got there 5 years ago and would say, you know, the market model for journalism doesn't necessarily work, that was still sort of considered to be not the right thing to say. And now actually you have many more different models, so you're beginning to get a mixed market. It does mean that things like, I think, the investment in public service media is globally going to become much more important, and America is kind of caught in that it doesn't, you know, its public media really is Facebook and Google. These are the things that are exporting internationally. It doesn't support that from a sort of a content and creation point of view yet. But you can see that with the investment that the BBC is likely to make, the investment that other international broadcasters are making in content which can move across platforms, that's going to be very interesting for that for that economy. But journalism actually making money, BuzzFeed, Vice, you know, these are the new models that are talked about often. One of the things they're disrupting is the advertising agency model. So just actually making the stuff for advertisers, so almost sort of re-engineering content creation and journalism back into that model and cutting out the creative agency step.
Benedict, you look at it very much from a Silicon Valley point of view. Do you think this industry is about to be disrupted?
Well, there's something I mentioned earlier when we were talking before, that I discovered a week or two ago that my little Hewlett-Packard printer can print out a 10-page summary of the New York Times every morning for me if I wanted to, which is kind of, it's the future as imagined in 1990, when we were going to have the information superhighway was going to happen, and it would be built by British Telecom and AT&T, and the New York Times and the BBC would do all the content. And somehow, like, all the downstream distribution would be completely transformed, but it would be the New York Times. That would be the only place that you get your news from and the only content you'd read. And I kind of see the same sort of thinking a little bit with car companies now, and the same thinking a little bit with TV companies. Like, the entirety of the way that people decide what they're going to watch and how they watch it will get changed. It seems sort of inevitable that that will transform how the content creation works as well. I mean, the thing that has come up kind of a couple of times is this question of distribution. There's always this problem that there's more stuff that you could watch than that you can read, than you have time to. Like, just as there are more books than you can read and there's more music than you can listen to, well, now there's vastly more TV than you can watch. And so how do you know what to watch what to watch? And it used to be that you had the schedule and you had the EPG that was regulated, and so you're on the home screen, and so there was this kind of captive distribution. And as you unbundle all of that and move that to apps, move that to smartphones, move that to streaming boxes, whatever it is, then all of a sudden the way that people decide what they're going to watch will get transformed.
And I think, you know, the important thing about, you know, there's kind of two important things to think about when you look at BuzzFeed. One of them is absolutely that they disrupt the advertising model because they create the advertising, and so they make advertising that actually works and that people like to watch. At least that's the idea. But the second thing is that if you want to understand BuzzFeed, you can't go to BuzzFeed.com because nobody does. The way that BuzzFeed works is it creates individual stories and then it works out how to distribute those stories. And then it looks at how people are reading them and how they're getting shared, and then it changes the story to make it work. And that story might work in SEA, that story might work on Facebook, that story might work on Twitter or on YouTube or on something else. And it's continually iterating hour by hour and minute by minute what stories work, how do you get audience, how do you drive people to read those stories or watch those stories or talk about those stories. And I think that's kind of the key thing. It's not that you change how you make programming, although, you know, yes, you do to some extent. But it's how you get people to watch them, and that in turn reshapes what kind of programs get made and who might be making them. So, you know, to the point about the New York Times, yes, people still read the New York Times, but they read BuzzFeed, and they're not reading BuzzFeed because their printer will print it out for them every morning. You know, it's those kinds of changes that I think matter.
Isn't the answer to that problem channels? I mean, it's often spoken as if the BuzzFeed model, the social model, will replace someone going out and choosing stuff for you. But certainly in the UK so far, and I don't know, Suzanne, if you want to talk about this, so far channels seem to be a really good way of...
Yeah, and someone said to me that we need Pandora for TV, and I thought, well, TV channels are kind of Pandora for TV already. They're kind of the brand just kind of captures what it is you're going to watch. But there will be new aggregation models as well within that. And I think, you know, as you break apart the episodes, obviously you break apart the episodes from the show, and you break apart the show from the channel, and you break apart the channel from the cable bundle, particularly in the USA. And so everything gets atomized, and then it gets reassembled into a new aggregation model. You know, it doesn't, you know, the web obviously sort of atomizes everything, and there's 10 billion web pages, but you don't go and look at 10 billion web pages. You go to Google, you go to Facebook or Twitter or Snapchat or whatever it is that can provide a new aggregation model. And so some of the old aggregation models or brands or however you want to think about those will last, but some of them will get, you know, there will be new models, and those new aggregation models will shape new kinds of content.
I think Stephen
What do you mean by a channel? What do you mean by a channel?
A playlist, really.
What?
The playlist of any kind. So someone choosing stuff on your behalf. It could be
But they're not necessarily obviously showing it in a linear way.
Exactly. I mean, it can
so
be...
it's an app.
Yeah, it can be
I
a
go to the
time-based
ITV
channel.
app, and they will tell me what they think is important to watch now.
Yeah.
And everything else is there as well.
Yeah.
And we have channels on YouTube too. Right?
Yeah.
I mean, there's a Top Gear channel on YouTube. There is any number of channels on YouTube. The fact is, though, most channels only probably generate 5 to 10% of the viewership for that content creator. So actually, it's much more important, at least on YouTube, to think about search, and also to make sure you've got cross-promotion from the ends of videos that works really well, and then also recommendations. And then we have to do a really good job of helping people find the content that they're actually looking for.
But I think the language gets quite elastic when you've got that described as a channel compared to a BBC One schedule.
Absolutely.
So I think
but is that what television's become? Because BBC One's on lots of places. It's on the iPlayer.
It is on lots of places, but 85% of viewing is still to live.
If I can say, I think TV channels were the original aggregators of a variety of content, and wrapped around those were a promise and increasingly a philosophy. We find that audiences want to know what you stand for. They want to decide whether they want to belong to you and be associated with you, and whether they trust you or not. And I think the bit we might lose is the TV word. You know, it was the TV channel that was aggregating. It will now be a brand aggregator. So certainly for, you know, Discovery or Eurosport, we need to make sure that that brand mark is true and the heritage can thrive across whatever method of distribution it is. And those take a hell of a long time to build, and you can break them overnight. You know, and I think those broadcasts that have been around, you know, for 25 plus years, we don't take lightly the relationship we have with our viewers, however they view us. And it'd be interesting to see of the new arrivals, how quickly they can build that relationship, and how long that trust will last.
Benedict, I think you would...
Yeah, well, I was going to say, I mean, I think, again, it comes back to the unbundling question. You may go to the aggregator to see the story, or you may just search for the story, or the show, or the show may be recommended to you by a friend. So, you know, the part of the TV production business that gets challenged is the stuff that people only watch because the aggregator showed it to you. That's to say, it's the TV shows that you would never search for, and you might never bother to tell people to watch, but you watch because it's 5 o'clock on a Sunday and the show's there, and it's kind of okay. And it's that kind of, it's the kind of the curve gets much, much, much steeper. You know, the things that are at the head, the things that everybody talks about and everyone will recommend do much better. And then you have the very, very long tail of stuff that gets 10 or 20 views or 100 views. But that kind of middle bit that got sold because it was on the table at the front of the bookshop, or it was in the record store, or it was on the album, so you had to have it because you bought the album and those tracks were there anyway. It's all that stuff that doesn't quite work on its own, but works because of the channel. That's the thing that falls away.
Stephen, were you trying to come in?
Oh, I was just going to say that the interesting thing about that relationship is where there are, in America, quite a lot of the cable networks think that the way to have that is to be very niche and to have a very clear sort of subject range as to what they're willing to cover. But you look at some of them and they do the opposite. I mean, HBO, what is it that links all its different shows? You might say quality. It certainly isn't, it isn't like so many other cable networks in America, which are, you know, a particular kind of, American cable is divided between female and male, and then it's divided between age, and then, I mean, whether it's urban or
But I think what's interesting there is a prestige around it. Whether people watch it or not, people think to, you know, that to go out and say, oh, you know, I'm a viewer of HBO content, says something about them. So yeah. I think again, it's the reputation that the brand has with the aggregation of content underneath that matters.
Benedict, picking up on what Emily was saying earlier, do you agree with this view that there's three or four big platforms now, and that they have sort of huge power coming over this sector?
Well, obviously, YouTube is a fantastically run business, so they'll be fine. I think the problem is everything's changing so much. I mean, YouTube appeared, you know, relatively short time ago and became this dominant platform. Then Facebook has become although you can argue about the statistics if they're counting 3 seconds as a view. But Facebook will be a big platform. Snapchat could be a big platform. There will be others. You know, this industry is not finished changing at all. We're kind of in a sense, we're kind of between waves in that YouTube happened, Facebook happened, smartphones happened, Apple, Google won, WhatsApp happened, and but there's going to be a whole bunch of more change in that, and so there'll be more aggregation of platforms. That said, I mean, just inherently within each category, you're not going to have 10 or 15 things, you're going to have 3 or 4 things, so it will kind of move in different ways. But each of those will have very different dynamics, so the way that people find stuff on YouTube is going to work very differently from the way that people find stuff on Snapchat or on Facebook.
Emily, I mean, you've said before you think there's a need for regulation here. Do you think that's...
Yeah,
how would that be done?
This doesn't go down very well in America, I have to say, so I'm glad to be back in the UK to say it over here, which is, I mean, you know, so as Benedict says, that it will change all the time. However, Instagram, WhatsApp, Facebook, they're all owned by the same company. They're all owned by Facebook. You know, you look at these, you look at the access to capital. You look at the fact that everybody in America at the moment is talking about, you know, will Google buy Twitter? You know, will Facebook buy Twitter to stop Google buying it? You know, we're looking at a really unique period where the technology is changing so quickly, and so is consumer behaviour. So, for instance, when we talk about news audiences, 2015 is the first year where more news output will be consumed on mobile phones than any other way. You know, that's sort of happened. That's happened already in the States. And those things are in the, you know, there is a battle now for the mobile web, and Steve is right that Chromecast is a great thing. It does mean that you still have a horizontal screen, you still all gather around it in the evenings. But the actual sort of, you know, access to that and the paths that your programs or your apps take to that are going through an increasingly narrow number of funnels. Now, you know, news provision in the US, 41% of US adults surveyed by the Pew Research Center said this year that they used Facebook as a source of news, not the source of news, but as a source of news. As that moves to become, you know, kind of 70% of adults, and it becomes the primary source, can you imagine the power, that power being allowed to be vested in like one broadcaster or one media owner? And the fact is that sort of all of this, you know, how things then reach audiences, how they're shared, who gets to, you know, who gets to see what. You know, Mark Zuckerberg has enormous power in terms of saying video is the #1 thing for us at Facebook this year. That means that actually kind of, you know, if he wants to create the algorithm to serve you more video, that's what you will see. We can't interrogate how those paths are created because they are commercially sensitive and therefore protected from interrogation. From a democratic point of view, that's really problematic. You know, if we believe that media distribution has to have some sort of transparency and accountability attached to it. And broadcasters have always been sort of tethered by that. Press, you know, kind of not so much, but at least it's kind of transparent and accountable.
It's interesting how quickly it happened in the UK, for example. Same in America. You know, the launch of cable and satellite to regulation of the EPG, less than a decade.
Yeah.
Why do you think why do you think it's almost ridiculous to say that in America? Why do you think it hasn't?
Well, no, just because it's an anti-regulation environment. It's an environment that says that regulation kills. But, you know, kind of, I mean, they're anti-regulation when it doesn't suit them, and when it does suit them, they're very pro-regulation. So there have actually been strong speeches, not least from the president this year, on net neutrality, and that's the principle that everyone should have equal access, you know, to the internet when it comes to uploading. The BBC was privileged over somebody who was, you know, uploading video from their garage. That would be wrong. However, you know, if the Facebook app on your mobile phone is the new net neutrality, you know, who is going to say, and at the moment it's like, well, no, there's so much competition in the market. There just isn't so much competition in the market. It's almost impossible now to actually compete against Google because it's so big. It has such great access to capital. And these are things that I think can't be solved without some kind of regulatory intervention, which I think there will be.
You keep saying they're using this phrase, access to capital. WhatsApp has 900 million users and 50 engineers. The thing that's fundamentally changed in the internet in the last 20 years is you don't need any capital.
Well, you do and you don't. So would you say that you can now compete with YouTube or Google in the same way that you could 5 or 6 years ago? I think it's like just really difficult to catch that amount of content overnight. You don't need the capital. The amount of money it takes you to get to 1 million or 5 million or 10 million users, the amount of capital it takes you to build something that's hugely popular has collapsed by an order of magnitude. But you're talking about creation versus actual sort of, so WhatsApp, as you say, 50 engineers, you know, great distribution, network, etc. It can't, but it's not challenging Facebook because Facebook bought it. You know, Facebook had to pay $19 billion to buy it, though. Yeah, but that's my point, which is, you know, if you see the threats coming from a disruption... Well, no, but the point is it's incredibly easy to create something very big now, and you don't need a lot of money to create something very big. And Facebook goes and buys WhatsApp and Instagram, and then Snapchat comes along, and Evan Siegel said he doesn't want to sell. And now he's gone and created a 100 million person audience himself, and there will be more and more and more of those things coming up now. I don't know, there will be. I mean, this is a point of genuine difference. The point is the idea that the door is shut here, and that somehow now that's it, well, they've won, that's just wrong. I mean, there are certain kinds of company, and there are certain structures where you get a kind of a winner-takes-all dynamic, and you have a lead that's been built that's very hard to catch up with. So it's extremely difficult for anybody to build a better machine learning engine than Google now. It would be extremely difficult for a whole bunch of structural reasons for somebody to take on directly the kind of product that Apple's built because of the vertical integration that it has. We've seen over and over again, it's extremely easy. Or it's not easy, but it's perfectly possible for somebody to go out and create an audience that's got hundreds and hundreds of millions of viewers because it's happened over and over and over again. I mean, remember, YouTube was, Google had a Google video that was trying to compete with YouTube, and it failed completely. And Google had to buy. YouTube is now owned by Google. But my point is that instead of talking about a dozen or 2 dozen providers or 3 dozen or 500, you know, we are talking over and over again on a global scale about 3 or 4 or 5 very powerful companies with enormous market capitalization. Well, that's kind of the Marxist teleology that we'll end up with one big company that owns everything, and it never works out like that. Well, there's always competition, and there's always change, and there's always new businesses being created. But there's also always been regulation in the media industry, you know, before now, and now there isn't. And there's also, it's not just there's no regulation, there's no transparency. It's impossible to know who is going to favour what type of content on their platform because it's not knowable. Well, the challenge with regulation in tech is it's kind of like the old saying that when you moved into a really expensive headquarters building, that was a sign that your company was doomed. And it's like the moment when the EU opens a competition investigation into you is a sign that you're in danger of becoming irrelevant because it takes them 10 years to do it, and by the time they've finished, it's another 10 years, and that's exactly what happened to Microsoft. And you know, that's now the situation that Google is in.
And the challenge, you know, the sort of the kind of the split in the thinking here is, it's one thing to look and say, well, Google has all of this, or Apple has all of that, or YouTube has all of that. But when you start talking about the regulation of how that functions, what you're really saying is not Murdoch shouldn't own this many newspapers. You're saying I'm going to go and create a regulatory structure that decides how the editor puts different stories in different bits of the newspaper. You know, you don't regulate how the editor of a newspaper decides where to place stories. And even more when you look at a social platform like Facebook, what you're really saying is you're going to regulate how people are going to share stuff, or you're going to regulate what things people search for on YouTube, or you're going to decide that YouTube has got to push stories to different places in search results.
Or you're just going to make it transparent, so that if there are questions about how that is being done...
But how do you make transparent a search engine that has 300 or 400 different criteria?
Well, but I mean, you know, you work for a major investor in Silicon Valley technology, and this is what I mean by, you know, that these companies are not favoured by regulation. Google is not favoured by regulation in Europe. And yet the ecosystem, so you can either take the view that the creation of things like broadcasting regulation were just a function of the market at the time and reduced bandwidth, and therefore you needed regulation, right? Because you needed access to platforms, and that now it's irrelevant because if what you believe is right, that Benedict's is saying is right, is that it's really easy to compete. It's interesting talking to people who are creating platforms now. So, you know, if you talk to somebody like Evan Williams, who's creating Medium, he was a creator of Twitter in the first place. You know, he wrote a piece last week saying everything is going to distribution. You know, we're going back to a point where it's going to be very closed. It's going to be very difficult for, and it's a platform play. And so therefore you have to be able to compete with the big platforms. And that growth has happened very quickly. We might be able to see you know, many search engines challenge Google in the future. Google and Facebook are investing so much in things like artificial intelligence, in robotics, in, you know, the very best technology coming out of all of the best sort of centers of creation. It is entirely possible that something else will be created. But it's also very hard, I think, in a way that it wasn't 10 years ago, because, you know, it was a much more sort of, it was a new entrance playing field, and it just isn't anymore.
Let's talk about... It might be time for a film in a minute, but if I can say a couple of things, maybe. I sort of feel like a dead guest at a dinner party. Everyone's sort of...
Sorry.
Everyone's sort of talking about me, but I'm sort of here in the corner.
Can be arranged.
Yeah, that's right. Someone got shot Abraham Lincoln at the theatre, didn't they? So, look, I think that if you were to ask the founders of Google, they would say a couple of things. One is you have to just focus on the user. And it is incredibly easy these days to build really large businesses really fast. So if the competition, if you ever were to ask the founders what their view of the competition they worry about, it would be the guy who's in a garage, or the couple of guys who are just out of MIT who are in their garage, because actually that's how they started themselves. They, at the time, there was something called Alta Vista, if everyone remembers that in the search world. And it didn't look like anyone was ever going to challenge their monopoly in search because they just had it all sorted. And then there was Yahoo around doing search. There were lots of, so I think the market is very challenged. I remember it's easy to break in. I think there's people used to say, well, you never displace Nokia in the mobile phone world. I just don't accept the idea.
But
that
at the end of
they're sort of lock-in.
At the content creator side of it, do you think people are able to make enough money on YouTube to create the content that you want, or indeed to be fair to them as consumers? I mean, lots of people would say you can get 1.5 million views on YouTube and be making a pretty small amount of money. Is that something that you
Well, look, I think content creators on YouTube, I think a lot of people are building businesses on YouTube now. Some are dedicated to YouTube or dedicated to online. Some view YouTube as an extension of what they otherwise do. So that could be a production company or a broadcaster. And then for established media companies, I suppose YouTube is one of the outlets that they will have. It's one of the windows of the distribution of their content. And people have always had fairly sophisticated windowing mechanisms to maximize the value of the stuff that they create. I think there's lots of examples of people creating content only on YouTube who are doing very nicely.
But Stephen, would you ever think about, either you want to come in on that?
I mean, no, we don't even think about making stuff for YouTube. The economics doesn't work for a company like ours. It does in as much as we're part of the All3 Media group, and All3 Media have a company, Little Dot, that focuses on the commercial opportunities that YouTube offer as one of the many ways in which, or the key way in which it can exploit the digital opportunities. But for the television industry that is supplying existing cable or some of the new suppliers or the traditional broadcasters, they don't see any way in which their current economics can work making stuff for YouTube.
But I think it's also, remember, it's early days. So there are 2.5 billion people online. There'll be 5 billion people online by 2020. The pace of change is going to pick up. It's not going to slow down.
I think it makes an enormous difference when people can get into the habit of starting to watch YouTube in front of a television, and it's just a question of the same remote that lets them watch BBC One. They click to YouTube, and another click, and they're onto a show that they want to watch.
Right. I don't know if there's anyone here from Virgin Media, but I think they would confirm you can do that now on their boxes.
Yeah, but people aren't in that habit yet. I mean, I think
fair enough.
The advent of the smart television just shouldn't be. I mean, anecdotally, one's experience of going to friends and seeing the difference it makes from when YouTube was something you watched on your laptop or on a computer, and now people are just sitting there and they just press the button and all the Netflixes and the YouTubes are up there, and it's so easy.
Yeah. Susanna, and then we'll play the next.
Yeah, I mean, to sort of bring it back to a more prosaic level, I think, you know, there's big questions around where the advertising pound is going to get spent, where the subscriber pound is going to go, because both those things, or at least one of those things, is going to be required to support any of these models anyway. And I think that comes right back to the very first thing I think that Cassian talked about, which is storytelling, and Emily talked about that as well. How you know, your method of distribution, be that big screen, small screen, via YouTube, whichever aggregator you like, is just the point to get you there for the first second. Then what? Then it's about the story, you know, the time well spent or not. So it comes right back to that. And I think one thing that I think the broadcasting industry does need to really get its act together on is actually challenging the amount of viewing that is being claimed by you know, some of these new entrants. So for example, as we were saying, you know, a video that just starts playing as you scroll down your Facebook friends, for me, doesn't count as a view. You know, viewing is measured in a very transparent way, and you know, we take pride in that. And I think if we're all going to play in the same park of viewing, let's get a few kind of agreed definitions around what viewing means, and let's not overclaim. I think it does a disservice to the new entrants, and actually certainly does a disservice to broadcasting.
Do you think if we got to the holy grail of measuring everything in some common currency, do you think that that would show that the traditional broadcasters have nothing to worry about, or would it just be a sort of a change in the rate of decline? Listen,
we've always got something to worry about, haven't we? But I think, you know, there is a degree of the way I look at it, you know, the sort of question about, you know, is everything being disrupted? Of course it is. You know, things have been disrupted forever. And I think this behaviour was always there, inherent, and technology has untapped it. People are quite selfish. You know, they want to watch what they want when they want. And I know, you know, when you go to a friend's dinner party and someone gets Spotify out and people start ramming, you know, play next, hang on, that was in the line, and then someone brings YouTube up and goes, oh, this thing I want to show you is funnier than the thing, and everyone starts bricking and rowing about it. It's quite a selfish one-on-one relationship, and I think that is very different to sitting down and watching Gogglebox together as a family. And also, if I can say, I think these one-on-one relationships, we're finding in our research is it can be quite lonely. It's you and your phone, and I would love to know how many people here, I'm sure many of them are on the app, but many are just sort of go, you know, Facebook, check the news. You know, it's a little bit of a need we've created for a quick fix, a bit of attention, you know, deficiency disorder. You just need that, but it's a different role to sitting down and watching a lovely bit of slow TV that Cassian's going to make.
Stephen, then, answer your own question. Is TV over?
Well, not if we're talking about 2020. I mean, TV clearly isn't over. I don't think anybody's been suggesting that on this panel. The question is, who's going to pay for it, and how's it going to be distributed? And clearly, it's challenging to a lot of the current suppliers, the current distributors, the way in which things are going. I mean, if you really can just get a broadband connection and be able to see all those apps, why pay for a Virgin Media package or a Sky subscription? I think it's people like that who face the biggest challenge.
And that's interesting, isn't it? That Apple last week was saying future of TV is apps. Netflix have been saying that for a long time.
hasn't happened. Are we about to see that happen over the next 10 years, and what will that mean for the traditional bundlers?
Well, I thought the interesting thing about the Apple announcement was that it was a little bit of an anticlimax, in that it wasn't actually a transformative product. It was just, what Apple are aiming at is making the best streaming box of the dozen streaming boxes that are on the market. It's not actually a different commercial offer. It doesn't break apart the US cable bundle. It doesn't give you any fundamentally different economic model. It's just another streaming box, and maybe the best one, maybe not, depending on what you want. And I think that kind of, digs into it is, who is it that owns who is it that's paid for those TV shows in order to broadcast them? So if Sky's bought rights to movies, or Netflix has bought rights to shows, or HBO has created rights to shows, then those are the people who'll charge for it. What breaks apart, I think, is the the ability to use the existing distribution model to drive audience to certain things, because the new distribution model will drive audience to different things. And some people will choose to just buy HBO. It kind of looks now like it's the other way around, that people use HBO and Netflix to top up rather than cancelling their cable bundle and just having HBO or Netflix. But you enter into that kind of swirling mass of unbundling and disaggregation, and we'll arrive with a new aggregation model at the other end.
But cable subscription is going down.
Yeah, I mean, the US model is so unique, though, because it's so overserved. And, if we have, whatever the number is, 90% of US households have pay. And you can't really get anything good if you don't have pay. Whereas the UK market, arguably, is a bit more of a Goldilocks market, where kind of the people who have Sky are kind of happy that they've got Sky, and the people who don't are kind of happy that they don't. And you can kind of make a choice about what TV you want. Whereas in the US, if you want to watch kind of anything that anybody's talking about, you kind of have to have a pay TV package of some kind. I mean, to your point about where the revenue goes, this is kind of a rerun of what happened to telecoms companies, where it used to be that your line rental was very cheap and then your calls were expensive, and they just rebalanced it so that now you pay a flat rate for everything. And that's certainly what the cable companies will try and do in the US, is that instead of it being $50 for the broadband and $50 for the TV, it'll be $100 for TV and broadband, and they won't offer you a $50 package. And so that's certainly where Comcast will try and just shift things. Like, you'll just pay for the pipe. What you do with the pipe is up to you.
But couldn't that, in a way, to bring us full circle, be, if you're a content maker, it could actually make your distribution easy. I mean, it could be that the future of television is apps, but not people who collect apps. Just people, HBO can go directly to people. I mean, what could that mean for the people who, at the moment, are making a business out of bringing all the content together? Actually, it could mean for your journalists or your content makers, there's a much more direct route to your consumers than there ever was before.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think that goes back to what we were saying before, though. There's so many more people who've created channels on YouTube or create channels online that you can build an app. I think we paid out $7 billion through Google Play to app creators last year, many of whom will be television or video related. So I think there's many, many more ways to distribute content. The companies like Google create tools that people who tell stories can use to reach a global audience. That's a good thing.
I think if Sky loses sport, then it's suddenly the whole idea that people are sort of happy with Sky and they'll stay watching Sky. They watch it because it's the only way to get live sport.
Yes.
But they're losing that, or they're beginning to lose it.
And there's permanent rumours that YouTube is going to buy
a particular offer, as opposed to having to pay $100 a month to have anything, which is kind of the way the US model works, to kind of exaggerate a bit.
And it does mean that there are certain rights categories. So we mentioned sport over and over again. The amount that CBS paid for 1 month of college basketball, which it is March Madness, this is billions and billions of dollars, as opposed to 10 million or whatever. And that in itself throws up a real sort of challenge for distributors, because there will be a small category of rights which are really expensive, because they are the ones that can aggregate. Because people do want to collect together, but they can also collect together in very different ways. So actually, weirdly, if you can supply the kind of material for a watch party, it makes your show very sort of compelling in a way. It's just a different. But it does mean, I think, that there are certain categories of rights that fit that, which are mostly live rights, and everything else is much more challenged in terms of.
So there's often rumours that YouTube are going to buy. There were rumours you're going to get involved in the Premier League auction last time, or sport in America, American football. Is that all just speculation?
Well, I think anything you've read is definitely speculation.
Yeah. You can never see a world in which you
Look, we're not a broadcaster. Okay, I don't think we intend to become a broadcaster. I think we don't intend to create content either. I just don't think that's not something that we've necessarily got the skills for. We're a technology business, and we sort of know where our limits lie. That said, there are lots of people who have bought broadcast or television rights for sports events who choose to put that content on YouTube. So during London 2012, there was live coverage available on a couple of YouTube channels, one from NBC and one from the IOC. And we had 3,500 hours of live coverage of London 2012 in 65 countries around the world, with all of the associated VOD content and the rest. There were 150 qualifying games to the World Cup, last year's FIFA World Cup, that were shown on YouTube. So there's no shortage of quality content, but maybe it's not us that are creating that content, it's other people that are placing it there. And they might be broadcasters, and they might be the new generations of media companies that come along.
So what does that mean, finally, Susanna and Stephen, for channels, for ITV, BBC, Channel 4? What's the role for us in the next 5 or 10 years? If the sport's going elsewhere, people are going to YouTube. What's the unique?
I mean, for me, you know, we are not really seeing long-form content thrive anywhere other than broadcasting. You know, as Stephen said, it's high investment, it's top quality. You can't do it on the cheap. So, for as long as long-form content is something that we continue to do very well and win very large audiences for, then we still have thriving businesses. But I think we need to also evolve with the audience. And what is the share of screen time that is drifting over to these new players? What are they doing that we're not? And we have to understand that. I think we're very good at making them feel, laugh. You know, it's lovely hearing everyone laugh at, you know, those things, those Gogglebox bits. But sometimes, you know, you need an hour to feel, and you know, we're all humans. But I think for us, we're thinking, okay, if we're good at making people feel, how do you take that to the next level? And we're moving gently and experimentally into virtual reality. Because the next thing is, you know, you've got the intellectual kind of interest, you've got the feeling from the heart, and then, you know, what does it feel like? What does it smell like? What if I touched it? You know, if we're really about enhanced experience, we've got to take good storytelling on, but never forgetting that our core excellence is good storytelling.
I mean, what it means for you, particularly the BBC, is take risk. You're there in this privileged position with pretty much guaranteed money, and you've got to earn that by taking risk, commissioning the best ideas from the best people that will cut through and distinguish themselves in this sea of content. And you do that sometimes. You can do it even better.
But can I just make a point on that as well? So there are lots of examples where the BBC is doing quite well. So you actually have the largest radio station on YouTube. So Radio 1, in search of a younger audience, chose to prioritise distribution on YouTube amongst the many things that it does. Got a couple of million subscribers. I think it is the largest radio station on YouTube as far as I'm aware. And I heard someone from Radio 1 say, well, you know, we have lots of DJs who don't own a radio. You know, it's ironic that one of the most successful parts of the BBC on YouTube is actually an audio service.
It is. And there's a longer story we could go into about that, but we're running out of time. So if we could just bring up the vote. Who is going to seize the future of TV? Unfortunately, not the BBC, it turns out. It's going to be a tough battle between the content creators and the global aggregators, with Radio 1 on YouTube an honourable exception.
Can it be not a zero-sum game, though? Is that also okay?
Yeah, there is quite a strong vote for all of the above as well. But it's quite interesting how few people have gone for the national broadcasters. But with that, if you could thank our fantastic panel in the traditional way. And we now all exit. Thank you very much indeed.